This week, in the conversation, I have the honor to welcome Dr. Carolyn Fluher-Lobban, Mr. Firmin Charlot, and Mr. Kevin Sidnoa. We're going to be talking about the equality of human races, written by one of the most brilliant Haitian scholars of the 19th century, Anténor Firmin. But before we get into this video, I just want to remind everyone that it's important to subscribe to this channel. And if you do, don't forget to click the notification bell so that way every time a video is posted, it'll go directly into your portable. So let's get started. Again, my name is Ardain Isma, and I'm here with three important professionals: Dr. Carolyn Fluher-Lobban, Mr. Charlot Firmin, and Mr. Kevin Sidnoa. We're here this morning for a historic conversation about an important Haitian scholar regarded as one of the most brilliant intellectuals, Haitian intellectuals of the 19th century. We are talking about his famous and compelling book titled The Equality of Human Races. And I have to say before we begin officially, I came to know about the English version of the book when I was teaching. I was a professor down at Universalism University. And I was speaking to a fellow professor, a colleague, who told me that we were talking about the book itself. And he said, "Do you know there's an English version of this book?" And I said, "No, I didn't know about that." He said, "Well, you know, I'm going to bring that version for you to see it." And then the next day he brought it to me. And I said, "Well," he said, I said, "I'm going to order it right now." And he said, "No, I've already done so. I've ordered a copy for you." And since then, you're talking about Savoying, and I wolfed down the book. I was very emotional. Like I told you, Carolyn, I read it twice because the first time I was very, very emotional. The second time, I had to put all my Haitian patriotism, my emotion aside, okay, to do an objective reading of the book. And ever since, I have been wanting to have that conversation with Carolyn. So to begin with, I'll begin with you. So okay. How did you come to know about Anténor Firmin, coming from New Hampshire?
This is just a minute. This is a wonderful story, and I think you will appreciate so much how this story came to be. Richard, please, we've got some background here. This story is one of the wonderful accidents of history, I would say, but also the coming together of forces which could never have been predicted, but came together, right place, right time. And so the story, I love to tell it. I never get tired of telling it because it's a marvelous one. Mm-hmm. So as you know, I'm an anthropologist and I'm an Africanist. So actually I've spent most of my academic career working on the African continent, almost 6 years of field work in North Africa, in Sudan, which is the main country. In fact, we had a meeting yesterday of the Sudan Studies Association, also Egypt. I'm an Arabic speaker, and so that's my fieldwork experience.
Okay.
But also, I was raised in a very progressive household. I grew up in Philadelphia first. My father was a union organizer. Okay. Then we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, at the time before the Civil Rights Movement, before the good trouble began. Okay. And I witnessed segregation in a way that I never had before. And I was, of course, furious and incredulous, but became part of the Civil Rights Movement. So that took me to anti-racism. And so when I got my first job, my husband and I were both hired at Rhode Island College in Providence, Rhode Island. The first course I wanted to teach was anthropology of race and racism. And so that was 1976. And believe me, the course was controversial because some of my colleagues said, this is not a course, this is a cause.
Okay.
This is not an academic work, this is a cause. And so I said, excuse me, but there is a long literature here in Europe, in Africa, in the New World that can be addressed here, which shows that this is an academic study. So I prevailed, taught anthropology of race and racism. So here's where the wonderful accident occurs. So I'm teaching anthropology of race and racism, and I have a student, Haitian student. They're always playing a very important role because they don't keep quiet. So I was teaching about Gobineau, Gobineau, who wrote essay sur l'inégalité des races. So essay on the inequality of races in 1850. I mean, a long time, but it became a classic of racism and was used even by Chamberlain and by Hitler during the Nazi era to quote the so-called science of race. So I was teaching about this critically. And so Jacques Georges raised his hand very politely. He said, excuse me, professor, but have you ever heard of a Haitian writer, and he couldn't remember, so I think the name's Firmin, who wrote The Equality of the Human Races, de la l'égalité des races humaines. And he said, well, he said, you need to try to find this. And so I said, okay, I try to find it. The accident was that there was a professor at Brown University named Aslan Charles. So someone in the network said, hey, there's a Haitian professor at Brown, you know, maybe he can help out. So Aslan was the one who did the search in American libraries. There were only 3 copies of this book in America. One was at the Library of Congress. So kindly, they sent us a copy, a Xerox copy. So we looked at it. And the minute I saw it, I said, my God, this is an incredible work of anthropology. Wow. It's an incredible critical work, even though I don't know French. So it was then that we undertook to translate for Aslan to translate the book. And for me to Aslan translated the book, and you know, I said, this is important anthropology, this is important. So some of the the vocabulary and the technical words, I helped out with. But this is a brilliant translation, which when I think if it had not been a Haitian patriot, it would not be the beautiful work in English that it is. Right. If it was just translated, this is old French, 19th century French, from word by word, it wouldn't have the impact that Aslan gave this book. And so actually when we were doing this work, it was over about a year. He kept saying, I said, pour la cause, and he kept saying, pour la patrie. Pour la patrie. I would say for the cause, he would say, for my country. And so that is really how it happened. And as I said, it happened that Aslan was in Brown that year. It happened that we got a copy. And immediately when I saw it, I said, this is a remarkable work of anthropology. Then when you start to go through it like you did, and you see the richness that is there, the intellectual power. So and I want to say this too, because we haven't mentioned this yet. So compelling, so strong. But I wanted to also say that, that Firmin was educated in Haiti. People think, oh, he must have studied in France. He must have had some European. He was educated completely in Haiti, completely.
And that's the question I was going to ask Mr. Charlot, because at one point in the 19th century, even when Firmin went for president, there were rumors in the country because many Haitians, they heard of him, but they had never seen him. So they say he was a white guy or a quadroon mulatto gentleman until they saw him. So Mr. Charlot, I know you are a descendant of Anténor Firmin. And how do you feel when Carolyn is telling us how strong and compelling Haitian education was in the 19th century? And Firmin was a living testament to that. He never studied in any prestigious university, as it was customary to Haitian elite children to go to Europe and study in Europe. So how do you feel being a descendant of Firmin?
Well, I must say that I'm not a descendant of Firmin biologically, but however, I must say that I am a descendant of Firmin intellectually.
Okay.
I'm thinking, and that being said, the the feeling is overwhelming. It's overwhelming because I find myself today continuing in part some of the work that in pieces that he had started. So the feeling is overwhelming, full of joy, and a lot of encouragement.
Okay. And then uh, Mr. Sidney, Kevin. Okay, so are you in the same situation? You want the same situation like me when you were exposed to the book? How did you learn about the equality of human races?
Well, I haven't had a chance to read the entire document. I've just gone through it. And Firmin, I've learned through Firmin about this. And it was very exciting for me to be in on this conversation, for several reasons.
Okay.
Number one, I've been very, very impressed with Dr. Is it Lobban, Carolyn?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Lobban. It's Lobban, yeah. Fluher-Lobban. Yeah.
Lobban.
Yeah, Lobban. Uh-huh.
What an extraordinary background and history. And you're kind of like uniquely suited for this thing. And Dr. Isma?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yes.
Ardain.
Okay, Ardain. Okay,
right.
Wonderful. I think taking the initiative to lay this out, and of course, Firmin, he has a lot of ideas. So you hang around this guy, you get exposed to a lot of stuff, and so this is exciting for me. And I have a pretty broad background, but when I started reading through, went online and started reading through this, and one of the things about, first of all, the Haitian people, that story is so remarkable historically in so many ways. They vary the very embodiment of autonomy, the very embodiment of independence, the very embodiment of courage. I mean, just as a country and what they've had to go through, and being next door to the American Empire, being able to slog through all these years and fighting back. And so to have this book emerge is just really, for me, it kind of personified the very essence of Haiti. But much more than that, when I think about culture, for me, I think about mind, language, memory, and example that defines a culture. And although it might not be manifest in this immediate way, when you have books like this that kind of consolidate the memory, the history of culture, so it's like that culture is still there, historically and theoretically and philosophically, not always manifest in the immediate day-to-day life. With people like yourselves, we keep this cultural idea alive. And so we talk about mind, we're talking about thinking critically, we're talking about thinking broadly. And so that gives us our mind. You're talking about when you read the book and then the importance of books and giving us that, and having people like Dr. Lobban being able to help us do the translation so that we can take that memory and make it a part of our mind and build our culture so that our example of discipline, our example of courage, our example of moving forward and being able to demonstrate that on a day-to-day basis, and being able to use the importance of language. That is to say, A is equal to A, direct language. And we're doing a translation, bringing this about. And so for me, it is just a testament to the human spirit. When I think about the morality of, when you talk about the equality of racism, anytime you talk about morality as the base of any culture, when you bring the human being to bear, the question of morality is there always. Whenever the human being is involved, the question of what it is to be human is there. And so with this, the racism is combated with the humanism, what it is to be human. And this book documents what it is to be human. And so we move away from the exclusion of racism to the inclusion of humanism. And he just affirms our humanity with this. So for me, it's just seeing it from a philosophical perspective, a theoretical perspective, and an affirming perspective, like, this is wonderful. And also just confirms what Haiti's always been. People don't always recognize it, but whenever I meet these Haitian people, you guys, you're an extraordinary bunch, Firmin, like this, but you guys, you're unique in the world. I mean,
and you know what? what really impresses me is the way he writes. You could see the poetry, and he's writing, referring to white. He say that white is not an exclusive preserve. You know, I mean, beauty. He was referring to beauty. Beauty is not an exclusive preserve for white. And he goes on to describe the beauty of blackness. And he gives several examples. And also on the issue of the treatment reserved to people of mixed races. And he gave such a beautiful, I would say, example between the Dominican Republic, the eastern side of the island, and then the mulatto community on the western side and Haiti. Firmin explained this in such a way. I mean, even if you were to be like I said, a racist individual, you would have to forget about your feeling, your sentiment, but also dwell on the explicit message itself. And I have a question for Carolyn on that, because you say that Firmin, in that sense, is that what you say is work of anthropology also can, I mean, is a revolution, has the revolutionary potential in that. Can you elaborate a little bit further, Carolyn, on that?
Yes, happy to do so. But before I get to that, I want to just, because this is a very special audience, you know, he wrote this book in 1885. Now, I'm an Africanist. That is the same year as the Berlin Congress divided Africa into colonial holdings among the European powers. You know that. So that is, and so that is no accident, and that is very powerful context. But also, as I say in my writings, you know, I don't need to tell you about the Haitian Revolution and the blow that it struck against the you know, European empire, especially France. But he was now the third generation post-revolution in Haiti. So there's no question in any Haitian's mind that they are equal to all humans. There's no question about the equality. They defeated one of the greatest powers on earth at the time. So how could any Haitian feel a sense of inferiority when they carried out such an act? Aslan often said that Haiti was never forgiven for its great crime. This crime of having defeated a great and that it has been punished ever since. And that is a subject for, you know, another discussion. But, you know, the history of Haiti is one which is, I don't need to remind you of. So before, I just wanted to give that historical context. Now, why is this a pioneering work of anthropology? Because he's writing at the time, since you've all read the book, when what was prominent was very Paleolithic ideas about humanity, that you could tell the intelligence of people by looking at their head or feeling bumps on their head or the size of their brains. The probably driest part of the book for readers today is the time that he spends on craniometry, on measuring, you know, the potential capacity of humans based on the size of the brain. And this was completely discredited later, but it was thought to be the way that the races could be ranked. So always Caucasian on the top, Chinese, Mongolians in the middle, but always the Africans and Negro on the bottom. And this was set up by the numbers, just like they try to do today, by the numbers to try to prove that there is a science of the inferiority of races. So Firmin comes, now he's not trained in anthropology, he's coming at this just as a thinking person educated in Haiti, who says, this is absurd. We have to discredit this. These numbers are false. These numbers mean nothing. And that whole section on debunking craniometry is pioneering. No one was saying that at the time. And so when I've written about him as a pioneering anthropologist, he broke that barrier long before this barrier was broken in American anthropology, much later, decades later, well into the 20th century. So this is a breakthrough work. Many people say he was ahead of his time. I think he was a part of his time for Haiti.
Right.
He would probably say there's nothing special about me. I am a Haitian who was educated in Haiti and who had the benefit of exposure to other cultures. So I can see the reality of what we have experienced. So his time in Europe, his time in France, you know, was very powerful for him. And of course, as you all know, since you've read the book, the reason he wrote this book is because he was not allowed to speak in the French Anthropological Society.
Correct.
He was admitted, as were you know, a few others who were there, but they were not permitted to speak.
Now,
So
I have a question for Charlotte. I have a question, Charlotte. You know that there's one aspect of Firmin is the one most Haitians know about is because it's this aspect that's been studied in Haitian history, Haitian Histoire d'Haïti. So we know that Firmin was a politician, mostly described as such. And also, we didn't know if in 1900, Firmin was already over 40 years old, I believe. That's when he participated, along with several intellectuals from the Caribbean, for the first Congress in London, in which Du Bois was present. And I believe he met with Du Bois in that Congress in 1900. So what does that make you, Firmin, as Haitian, and myself also as Haitian? How does it make you for Firmin to play such an important role in the early Pan-Africanism?
Well, first of all, I thank you for the question. I must say that I'm actually a little, I'm actually being caught a little off guard because I was fully getting ready to really listen more to Dr. Carolyn Lobban about the various pieces and aspects that come into play about her writing the book or translating the book, and also her experiences. But that question, though, the way that I can answer it is through my own experiences as a Firmin, and that is, it's a little bit like somebody opening the door for me. To be able to fully express myself, without, you know, without any reservations, and fully participate in any conversation that I find myself in. That being said, I want to share with you how I actually got to be in touch with Dr. Carolyn. I actually was reading an article online where she actually had a quote on there about the role that Haiti has played throughout the world. And I was so moved by that article that I sent a note to her saying that, you know what, this is a weird thing where normally when you talk about Haiti, that's not what is said.
Exactly.
And to my surprise, I have to say that I didn't expect a response. To my surprise, she responded, and that led to a conversation over years. And this is kind of how this is why I'm talking with you today, you know?
Okay.
So if that's not anthropology, I don't know what is.
Okay.
So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Now I have a question for Kevin now. Listen, Kevin. I just made reference to the 1900 conference, the first Pan-African conference, and Du Bois played also an important role in that conference, where I believe he was part of the committee that wrote the document. That was the official document in which he says, in 1900, Africans and people of African descent represent about half of the world population at that time. And he said it was a great disservice to deprive such a huge section of humanity the right to education. And I see Firmin's book right there. And I was just kind of wonder, Kevin, do you know, do you have any idea of, prior to that meeting, some sort of correspondence between Firmin and Du Bois at the time, in 1900? Du Bois was only about 33, I believe. He was 31 or 33. So, he was very young.
So we've tried to follow this particular line because the Du Bois papers are near to us, I think, in Amherst, Massachusetts. And so we had some people do searches for mentions of Firmin.
Right.
And I don't believe anything came up in writing. Okay. What happened between them, I don't know. We know that Firmin probably knew some English, but I don't know how fluent in English he would have been.
Right.
Of course, French, mastering French and Haitian Creole. And I don't think Du Bois, despite his name, Dubois, I don't believe that he was a French speaker. So I don't know that they could have communicated except through translation. So that is a piece which really still needs some research. There's still more research to be done on this, particularly putting all the pieces together, which are still a bit disparate. You know, you mentioned the Pan-Africanism, and it's one of the things that I think really is still can be fruitfully discussed, because on the one hand, Firmin is absolutely a universal humanist. He sees all humans as equal. He quotes from Victor Hugo and so many other universalists, you know, man is man or human is human. There are not these divisions. On the other hand, people have asked, you know, could he have been a Pan-Africanist, or was he a Pan-Africanist? The sentiment certainly is there. Now, his chapter on Egypt, which, right, you know, he starts quoting Champollion saying, Egypt is wholly African. And here you're talking to somebody who's a Sudan specialist. My husband actually excavates in this area from Memphis, meaning Cairo, to Merowe, which is in northern Sudan. This is where the pyramids in Sudan are, one of which is replicated on the dollar bill, by the way. So he knew about that. But you know, look, we're talking about 1885 when Africa is being colonized. The objective knowledge of the continent of Africa was not in existence. And so I think he was silent because, you know, he didn't want to conjecture about the state of the continent, except what he knew about the civilizational greatness. And so his statement that Egypt is African is very, very important, because Egyptologists and others have tried to cut Egypt out of Africa and say it's somehow related to the Middle East or to Europe and not to Africa. So for him to say that, Memphis to Merowe, and I've quoted this in many Sudan, you know, symposia that I've been a part of, you know, is very important and really pioneering and still relevant to this day. So one of the questions is, you know, was he someone who was ahead of his time? I think he was very much a part of his time, but we have had so little change in these areas. You know, we're still decolonizing the continent. We're still decolonizing intellectual efforts. And so the post-Firmin generations, I would like to talk, if we can, about Jean Price-Mars. So I see Jean Price-Mars.
Before we get to Price-Mars, Carolyn, I want to go back a little bit on Firmin and his knowledge about the United States in particular. He quoted two important books and the equality of human races. First, he quoted Frederick Douglas in his first autobiography. I can't remember the quote, but he said, I can't simply just give you like a summary of what he says in the quote. It was talking about how how Douglas explained the way racism in the South during slavery time, how they break down the morale of the slave to force him to accept his condition. It was a pretty compelling quote. But also, that book was released in 1885. And Douglas became the first US representative in Haiti. I believe it was about 1887. And Firmin developed a very close, I would say, diplomatic friendship or personal friendship with Douglas, because Douglas was the American ambassador and he was the Haitian foreign minister. And both of them worked together to fend off, I would say, to stall an American attempt to seize a part of Haiti. So, you know, so his position on the question of racism was very, very, to me, pretty compelling. So, Kevin, is there anything that you might want to say?
Well, you know, the themes are so broad. I mean, when you bring up Frederick Douglass and, you know, Firmin and Du Bois, you know, each one of those men, they had a sense of courage that was is unparalleled, and they are very, you know, they're scholarly. And the thing about it, they had this this communication to really personify what it, you know, this tremendous bravery. And so, as Dr. Carolyn had mentioned, you know, Firmin being very much a man of his time, and so he really embodied the best in culture in terms of being able to take that critical thought and put it in a scholarly format, and really represent the thing that we as human beings, when we come together as a society, which is the autonomy, independence. This is what Douglas is talking about. You know, Firmin is talking about this. This is what Du Bois talking about. You know, of course, with with Du Bois here in this country, you know, he was run out of the country because he was being so, every, you know, major leader in the 1900s was being monitored by, you know, the state, you know, and being destroyed, you know, right here in the United States. And all the people here wanted was just to be able to live a decent life, an autonomous life. Right. And Firmin is talking about, this is what Douglas is talking about. And so the themes are so broad, and being able to have people like Dr. Carolyn, you know, document this so that we can keep laying the foundation to keep affirming our humanity, you know, it's encouraging. So I would just say very much a man of his times, in the sense of being able to take his own critical thought and being able to put it in a scholarly format and really represent the Aristotelian logic of A is equal to A. Man is equal to man, human is equal to human. That is, the human is not equal to a thing. It affirms our humanity. And so that kind of language, the language is clear. A is equal to A, man is equal to man, right? You know.
And if I may add something, if I may add to this also, I believe we can also say Firmin was a man probably ahead of his time, because he predicted in a not too distant future, someone of African descent, a Black person, would be president of the United States.
Well, that's it.
You know, could you believe this?
We'll have to grant you that. I gotta grant you.
Could you imagine that?
Yeah, but you know, in terms of the. Oh, go ahead.
I kind of want to chime in to say, you know, because of his foresight in writing the book and in his train of thought, the idea that someone will be a president of the United States is not actually that foreign. If you think about the trajectory of Haiti, because Haiti helped the United States Revolution in 1776. Even before, this was like 1779, actually, even before Haiti had its own independence. And the thinking was, you know, it seems like there is a movement that we can see thinking about it in terms of in the future, right? There is a movement happening in the United States. Therefore, we should send soldiers to help them. And the train of thought is, if they succeed, then therefore they will then return the favor, right? It turns out that they were wrong, but still the train of thought is, to me, is very clear and consistent. And so by saying that a person of African descent will be the president of the United States, to me, it's sort of like something that's clear to, you know, at that time, to Anténor Firmin at the time. But it is weird that that's strange to us. And that's the part that I'm having a little trouble with. Like, you know, that's really odd that he would have thought that, you know, back then. You know what I mean? And so I think that's something that we need to re-examine, you know, even to this day. So from the technology standpoint, I kind of want to connect that with that same train of thought. From the technology standpoint, right now we have technologies being developed that that is make it that is gonna make it extremely difficult for folks with darker skin to be accepted in that environment because of the history that is tied to existing pictures that are being taken, that AI,
Right.
artificial intelligence,
Correct.
is artificial intelligence is being used
Right.
to decide whether who gets service, who can deny or get denied service, and who is then even are able to be represented in that. And so I think that I see a link there that folks who are forward thinking really need to stand up and say something about what's happening in that space, connecting it back to anthropology. And that's the piece. And so that's why I'm so grateful to be part of that conversation.
Okay. Now let's go back to what you just say, Dr. Carolyn, regarding Jean Price-Mas. Can we safely say that Price-Mas was one of the the pioneers of the negritude movement?
Yeah. You know, we are so many big questions here. I think we need a second version of this conversation.
Okay.
If you allow me just a moment to speak about Frederick Douglass, right, and why Firmin admired him so much. It was the slave narrative and the fact that he stood up to a slave master that was respected, and so Firmin knew about Douglass when Douglass came as U.S. consul. He wasn't ambassador; he was U.S. consul to Haiti. Right. So Firmin knew about Douglass. Douglass most likely did not know about Firmin, but when he met Firmin, and I don't know, I think they used a translator, so that's how these negotiations took place. But for those who are really keen about Haitian history, what was being negotiated here was the U.S. trying to get a piece of Haiti for a coaling station for its international shipping. Right. And Firmin, of course, was a foreign minister. And Firmin, knowing Douglass, respecting Douglass, and who knows what they said on the side, said, I am sorry, I cannot, as foreign minister of Haiti, yield 1 centimeter, 1 yard of Haitian territory to a foreign power. Correct. And so he stood up and said, Haitian integrity, territorial integrity is above all the most important thing, even though he knew and respected this man greatly. Actually, one of my graduate students wrote a master's thesis on the encounter between Firmin and Douglass, really? How it was covered in the US papers, really? And how it was covered in, he didn't have all the Haitian papers, but the US coverage is very racist, as you can imagine, and really trying to make the case on the basis of the inferiority of the Haitians and the superiority of the US, and it's right. So it's a very, very interesting encounter, which deserves a session all to itself. However, on the question of Pan-Africanism, of Jean Price-Mars, one thing that Firmin does not write about, and it was curious to me as an anthropologist, he never wrote about Vodun or voodoo. Right. He never wrote about it. He never even mentioned it. So in my mind, I'm thinking, did he not mention it because he thought it was too primitive, quote unquote, so it would somehow undermine the message of equality? So we don't know. That's a silent area. Price-Mars, who I really see as the inheritor of the Firminist tradition, and I want to remind you that the last book that Price-Mars wrote was an homage to Anténor Firmin. As the last
was that
book
the one titled So Spoke the Uncle?
Life.
Is not this one?
No, So Spoke the Uncle. So Spoke the Uncle is very important because this is looking into Haitian folklore. So Price-Mars is a folklorist, and he's looking into Haitian oral history, folklore, but also he sees voodoo or vodun as coming out of Africa, as being a reinterpretation of African spiritual traditions in the New World, and as a key to the Haitian success in overthrowing the French. that this spiritualism gave them the courage. To this day, Haitians say, bon courage, bon courage. It's a way to say, have good courage, be strong, be, you know what we're saying now, be strong. So Price Mars, I think, completed the message of Firmin, and he bows deeply to Firmin at the end of his life by bringing this so-called taboo subject of voodoo into Haitian folklore as part of Haitian resistance, as part of a culture which is syncretistic, meaning combining African heritage with New World realities, and particularly as part of the resistance involved in the, in slave resistance. He would say that the Haitian Revolution could not have been won without this spiritual presence. And so it's a very important piece of the whole story.
And Price Mars, if I can add this to what Carolyn just said, he was one of the most prestigious Haitian intellectuals in the early 20th century. And so much so, in 1956, Congress in Paris, when Du Bois was prevented to travel to Paris for that conference, and Du Bois was the one who was going to lead that conference, and the task was given to Price Mars. So it also explains how he was well regarded. And in that meeting, there were so compelling figures like Richard Wright was there, and Jacques Stephen Alexis was there, and great Haitian poets and writer René Depestre was there. So many important figures, but Price Mars was the one chosen to replace Du Bois in Paris in 1956. So that was extremely important what you raised, Carl, to see how he was regarded.
And also, so the first African independence comes in the 1960s, and one of the first nations was Ghana. The first premier or president of Ghana was Kwame Nkrumah. And Kwame Nkrumah, in a very important address, he mentions Anténor Firmin, and he mentions Price Mars. He mentions these Haitian forebears. And so there are many connections to Pan-Africanism. I also wanted, if you don't know about it, the Journal of Pan-African Studies. This is Gershon Williams. This volume was produced, 2014. It's all dedicated to the Pan-Africanist sentiments. I think this is a very interesting tension between the universal humanism, which is in Firmin unquestionably, but also I would say a kind of nascent or beginning Pan-Africanism. So I think that's actually an area for some new scholarship or some new ways of looking at this. And the question is, can you be both a universal humanist and a Pan-Africanist? In my mind, they're not contradictory.
But also, Firmin is regarded as one of the pioneers of the pan-Caribbeanism because of his relation to,
yes, that's right.
As a matter of fact, he died on the island of St. Thomas. So
that's right.
And in 1895, at his private home still in Haiti, he met with Jose Marti, who's still regarded as the father of the Cuban nation, where they discussed the issue. And when Marti spent a weekend with him in Ocap and Cape Haitian. So, but his position on that Caribbeanism, pan-Caribbeanism, he said it was necessary because that's what Toussaint Louverture wanted back in 1801 when he became the general who abolished slavery on the island of Hispaniola. So to tell us that, there's one document you mentioned, Carolyn, in the introduction of the book. You say that Firmin, from St. Thomas, he wrote not only the letter to the American president, but also he would letters from St. Thomas. That's the title of the document. Is there any way we can find this document, an English version of the document?
This document is very important. No one has written about it, and so this is another area for future research. The interest, I would say, in the Caribbean in the pan-Caribbeanism of Firmin is very high. As you know, there's a Spanish edition that was published in Havana, and those colleagues came to a colloquium or symposium, right, which was held, I forget the year, maybe, oh yeah, it was the 2004, so it would have been the 200th anniversary of the Haitian Revolution, but the conference was held in Trinidad because it could not be held in Haiti at the time. And so at that, Edwige Dandicat was there, many, Denis Lafarge, so many of the great writers and great intellectuals were there to discuss the importance of exactly what you're mentioning, pan-Caribbeanism. And this was certainly there in Firmin, but couldn't be developed. I mean, he died at 51. Right. He died relatively young by our standards, but left a legacy, which is really very, very tantalizing. My husband was doing some research here. So Du Bois was only 17 at the time of the writing of,
he was 17?
of Equality of the Human Race. Wow. He was 17, yes. Yeah, so okay. He's an old man to us. He lived to be in his 90s and a great,
at the meeting in London, he was a little older than that. But this is a conversation that right. is so interesting. We could talk forever, you know. Kevin, let me ask you something. The Souls of Black Folks, written by Du Bois.
Yes.
It's regarded as what you call like a Bible for African American, intellectuals.
Yes. Yes.
Now, do you see that? Is it a fair reference, fair assertion to the document?
Getting back to Dr. Carolyn's, point about the universal themes, and I agree with you. When you talk about pan-Africanism or, the pan-Caribbeanism, it's all about autonomy, and as human beings, it's about our human autonomy, so they're one and the same, just as a bigger scope. When you come together as a social structure, you're about autonomy, to be free, to assert your humanity, so I'm with you. I don't see a contradiction in those two. And so when you get back to Du Bois or Du Bois, whichever you get to, yes, because what he is doing is reaffirming what it is to be human in the souls of Black folks. He's reaffirming that. Just like the spiritualism you see in the Caribbean, it's a spiritualism for Black folks in the American Empire, for Black folks in the belly of the beast. He's saying, you are a human being. You deserve to be here. You should be able to search for what it is you want for your own life. Outside of the oppression of the state, right, who's taken away your humanity. So for me, the universalism is there, but it's targeted for Black folks, but anyone who's been beat over the head by systemic oppression, you have this spiritualism embodied in the souls of Black folks that says, hey, you are important, you're a human being, you should assert that. So I'm with you. I'm with that assertion that yes, it is, because what Dr. Du Bois is talking about, just as we have Firmin talking about the integrity of the island. He said, I'm not trying to give away anything. This is for the Haitian people. Du Bois and the souls of Black folks is talking about the integrity of our humanity. Right. The souls of Black folks, that is to say, the high ideals of our humanity and what we actually do when they come together, that's the soul. The essence of our humanity, the essence of morality being worked out. When we start talking about equality and autonomy and justice and fairness, do you represent that in your actions, the souls? So anyway, when I talk about that kind of integrity, I would have to go with that, with Dave.
And also, if I want to say just before because we're getting to the end of the conversation, I think that might have some influence when they met in 1900, because Du Bois, his father was Haitian. So in that sense, that might have added more emotion in their meeting back in 1900. So yeah, wow. So to really summarize such a wonderful, interesting conversation this morning, I just want to go, I'm going to start with you, Firmin. How can we contextualize Firmin's work of Pan-Africanism to the racial struggle of today? the struggle for racial equality of today?
Thank you for the question. Often we think about a lot of these movements as being very big, and the problems they're trying to solve can be considered overwhelming. And so what I will suggest is for each of us to figure out what we need to do in our own lives, not tomorrow, not the day after that, not next year, but today, right? To figure out, okay, what is it am I doing that can help to advance the ball, or that can help make a change in someone that I know, and then do that. My experience has been, if we were to do that, then we will have no idea to know what the impact that we can have in the future, generation. And whether we realize it or not, we are going to have an impact. And so I will live with that. And I also wanted to make sure that, I know this is being recorded, and so I wanted to make sure that the book was, I don't know if I can get it in there really quickly or not, but I wanted to make sure, maybe you might have a good copy of it, because I've got, I just wanted to make sure that folks who are going to view this recording,
right,
they do get a good snapshot of the book, so if so that it's easier for them to
ultimately, I will show
take a look at it.
Version of it. And
thank you, Dr. Carolyn Fluher-Lobban. It's such a pleasure to finally see you after so many emails back and forth. So I really appreciate you're reaching out to me, you're responding to my original email, and look where we are today.
Okay, and you, Dr. Lobban, same question?
Well, it is the question. And of course, Firmin is still relevant today, still alive and well today. And I had one more piece I didn't have a chance to share, but there's a connection to, from Bryce Mars to the founder of Africanist anthropology, Melville Herskovits, at the university where we studied for our PhDs, Northwestern. They work very closely together. So Bryce Mars to Melville Herskovits, the founder of Africanist anthropology in the US and really in the world, that connection is Haiti to US to the field of anthropology. I have many other works on race and racism I'd be happy to share, but Firmin is still relevant, can still inspire students to this day. Look, you read it twice. That's the biggest, to me, the biggest statement, that you have to keep reading this. You have to keep reading a text. There's still more research to be done on the works of Firmin that have not been analyzed. Still much, I think, work ahead of us in the fields of pan-Caribbeanism, pan-Africanism, universal humanism, working through that. The philosophical importance is very great. The exciting thing is that this is not finished. This is work which is still full of much potential. And I hope I live long enough. I'm happy I lived long enough to see this day. I hope I'll live long enough to see even more fruit.
Okay.
More fruits to come from Papa Firmin.
Okay, and it's the same question.
Okay, well, I will just affirm what Dr. Carolyn and what Firmin have both said, and the essence of the essence of American pragmatism as a working philosophy, like jazz music, is really about the conversation. Listening to one another and responding and creating this new product every single time. And so, with Dr. Lobban and Dr. Carolyn, I would say, let's keep the conversation going. And keep informing ourselves and keep doing what Firmin has suggested, to do what you can where you are right now. So there it is.
So we should have another one. Okay, so it's been such a pleasure to have such a wonderful conversation this morning, which will be published on CSMS Magazine and also on its YouTube channel, which is also we call the conversation. So
how about that?